Most people think that you need a 20% deposit to get into a home, but what if I actually told you that was a myth? Today, I'm here with my dad, John, a property investor and a mortgage broker, where we will break down how first home buyers can get into the market with a deposit of 5% or even 2% in some circumstances, and why waiting to save a 20% deposit might actually cost you more. So, Dad, a lot of people believe you need to save for a 20% deposit to actually get into the market.
That is a long-standing belief, Nicola, because normally people think banks will lend you 80% and you need to come up with that 20% deposit, especially when you're buying an estate where there's no stamp duty. So bank will lend you 80% of the property value,
and that's where the 20%
and you would come
comes
up with
from.
20% of the savings to go towards that property purchase. So that's the myth of what people think they need to be able to purchase a property. But the reality is some amazing government incentives available to help first home buyers get into the market with a deposit as low as 2% in some situations, but in most cases around 5%. We're going to go through those today. We're going to show you how you can get into a property faster.
That's pretty impressive. Would you be able to explain or give some examples of how you would do that with a 5% deposit saved up?
Yeah, definitely. So the scheme I'm going to refer to is the First Home Buyers Guarantee Scheme. So what that is, you'll be able to borrow up to 95% of that property value with no mortgage insurance at all. And what happens is the government provides the banks a guarantee of that 15%. So you're still lending at an 80% ratio in terms of the bank's purposes.
With
guarantees coming from the government. That's 95% lend with no mortgage insurance. So that can save you $20,000 to $30,000 just by itself. So this scheme is very beneficial for first home buyers. It's going to help a lot of people get into the market faster.
So in addition to a minimal deposit of 5% and no lender's mortgage insurance, you could be saving a lot.
Definitely. Yep. Definitely worth trying to understand this. And with Labor recently getting into government, the thresholds of the values of those properties that you can purchase increase significantly. For example, in South Australia, you can buy a property up to $900,000 under the government guarantee scheme and borrow 95% with no mortgage insurance. There are other qualifying factors, but
they're the main points.
They're the main points.
Because you said it varies state to state, what are some other states and how much can they borrow?
So what the government's done is increase the purchase price of what you can go to under the government guarantee scheme. So we'll go through each state very quickly in the capital cities. So in New South Wales, they increased the purchase threshold from $900,000 to $1.5 million. So you can purchase a property up to $1.5 million and borrow 95%.
It's a high threshold.
Very high in New South Wales because their average price of properties are a lot higher there as well. In Victoria, they've increased it from $800,000 to $950,000. In Queensland, it's gone from $700,000 to $1 million. In WA, from $600,000 to $850,000.
So similar to us.
In South Australia, it's gone from $600,000 to $900,000. So in Tasmania, it's gone from $600,000 to $700,000. In ACT, it's gone from $750,000 to $1 million. And in Northern Territory, it actually stayed at $600,000.
So does that all depend on the property market in that particular state?
Correct. So they've looked at what the average price is and changed since the last policy change with this government guarantee scheme. So in South Australia, obviously property prices have increased. They're saying from $600,000 to $900,000. So that's a big benefit there for first home buyers trying to get into the market where they can basically borrow 95% with no mortgage insurance, which means in some cases as well, on top of that, especially where there's no stamp duty, they only need a 5% deposit. And the states and we might just quickly go through the states and what their stamp duty figures where you don't pay stamp duty are as well, because this is very important to understand how much stamp duty and what the additional costs are. So in New South Wales, a first home buyer can purchase a property up to $800,000 with no stamp duty. And these are all for established houses. In ACT, $1 million. Victoria, at the moment, up to $600,000, so they're a bit low there. In Queensland, up to $700,000, WA $450,000. In South Australia, though, purchasing an established house, there's no stamp duty discounts at all. So they're the stamp duty threshold. So basically, at those price points, buying an established house, you only need a 5% deposit.
So would you be able to give me an example of an $800,000 house that is established with a 5% deposit?
So let's just use the states where there's no stamp duty at those figures, and I'm going to use New South Wales and ACT. So $800,000 purchase, there's no stamp duty. You're going to borrow 95%, which is $760,000. If you were to pay mortgage insurance, that's actually $30,000 you would have had to pay in mortgage insurance. So you're saving $30,000.
So that could potentially be your deposit.
The deposit you then require is 5% of
the purchase
$800,000, which is $40,000. So you need a deposit of $40,000 to purchase a property for $800,000. It's for an established house in those states where there's no stamp duty.
So if I could save $400 a week, I could potentially have a deposit for my first home in around 2 years?
Yeah, you probably could, yeah.
So what if there is stamp duty? Can you run that scenario for an established home?
Sure. So we'll run that scenario for South Australia. So in South Australia, if you were to purchase a property for $800,000, there will be stamp duty and transfer fees of around $48,000. So you need around that $848,000 to purchase that property. The bank will lend you 95%, which is $760. So the deposit you actually need is around that $88,000. So you need 11% deposit of your purchase price in South Australia. So buying an established house in South Australia, there are still benefits there, obviously, because you're borrowing 95% with no mortgage insurance, but you've got to cover that 5% plus the stamp duty cost as well.
Yeah.
Whereas the other states where they've got stamp duty concessions, you only have to cover that 5%.
So would you say that buying a newer house in South Australia would be more beneficial for a first home buyer?
At the moment, yes, and I'll go through that as well. So let's just run that same scenario in South Australia. For a new house, let's say we're going to buy land and build, or buy a brand new house that's never been lived in.
Yeah.
So in South Australia for new properties, where the government's giving first home buyers incentives is there's no stamp duty at all for first home buyers buying a new house or buying land and building. Yeah, so let's go through the purchase scenario of buying a property in South Australia. So in South Australia, buying a new house off the plan and selling on completion, or buying land and building, there'll be no stamp duty at all, but there is still transfer fees. So the transfer fees would be the value of the property that's transferred. So if you're buying land, for example, land at $400,000, transfer fees are around $4,000.
Yeah.
If you're buying a brand new house and it's $800,000 value, the transfer fees are around $8,000. So let's assume you're buying land and building then. The bank's going to lend you $760 against that property. So that's 95% of $800,000. Again, no mortgage insurance, so saving $30,000. The deposit you actually need to be able to buy land and build and have a completed property valued at $800,000 is only $31,000, which is quite amazing that you can buy a house for $800,000 with a deposit of around 4%. 3.9%. The reason why we get to that $31,000 because we've got the 5% of $800,000 is $40,000.
Yep.
We said there's going to be costs between $4,000 and $8,000, which means that say $44,000 that you need as a deposit, but $44,000 take the first homeowners grant, which you also get in South Australia, $15,000. That brings it down to a $29,000 deposit.
Okay, so that was a lot of numbers and a lot of titles and things. The main thing is here that I only need a $29,000 deposit to purchase an $800,000 property in South Australia.
Correct. No stamp duty.
No LMI.
No LMI. And $15,000 first homeowners grant.
But a transfer fee.
But you do pay transfer fees, yep.
So, Dad, I'm only like $1,000 away from a $29,000 deposit.
Well, what do you have saved up?
Around $28,000. And when we
good.
First started the podcast, I was at $15,000.
That's awesome, Nicola.
So only in the last year
I don't see you much these days because you're always working.
Well, yeah, I am working a little bit more, but plus my studies on top of that.
Yep, no, you're doing good, Nicola. That's awesome. And hopefully you can get to buy your first house very soon.
Well, my savings will only go up more when I start working for you.
Yeah, I can't actually wait for that, Nicola, because we are very busy in the office and you're going to make an awesome assistant and help us process those loans.
So if I already have close to $30,000 saved up, I'm potentially already in the property market because now I don't need to wait to save a 20% deposit.
Correct, Nicola. And the sooner you can get in the property market, the better. So these are my predictions of what I think is going to happen. At the moment where we have rates potentially dropping very soon, we have all these government incentives for first home buyers. Like that threshold from $600,000 to $900,000 is a huge benefit for people. I see there's going to be a lot of demand on the market and it's going to continue to push prices up. So by waiting longer and saving for a deposit,
it could cost you more.
It will cost you more in the long term because those property prices are going to be continually going to be increasing.
Yeah.
So the sooner you can actually buy a property, the better.
So my biggest takeaway from this episode would be that I'm almost in the property market and I could potentially have my own house in the next 3 months.
Potentially, yeah. Well,
with a deposit of 5%.
With your deposit side of things, yes. Now it's just we've got to work on your income and your borrowing capacity.
But when I start working for you, that will increase.
Yep, correct.
Well, how soon can we talk about a pay rise?
Let's just start first, Nicola. Let's see how good you are.
I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode, learning that you don't actually need hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy your first home. This has been such a comfort for me and I hope that has inspired you too. Make sure you chat to your broker and see what options you have in front of you because you actually might be closer to your first home than you think. I'm Nicola Kefalianos and I'll see you on the next episode.